item number 13.
Item number 13 is a resolution to recognize revenue and appropriate expenditures in the amount, and I've never had to say this a large amount before, so I had to think about it, $69,964,919 to the Restricted General Fund, the American Rescue Plan Act Fund 2021 budget for the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Nikki Simmons, County Controller.
Okay, so this resolution is a little more exciting than the last one. As we have been talking about for the last several months, El Paso County did receive our first allocation of the American Rescue Plan funding. And so with that, we've been working very hard with all of our departments and offices to try to make sure that we have a plan to address the most pressing needs in our county within the constraints from the American Rescue Plan. So I have a short presentation for you to show you the proposed budget for that, and then I will ask for a vote to appropriate the amount that we received, which was the $69,964,919 that Ms. May read into the resolution, or into the record. The American Rescue Plan Act, which we are calling ARPA, which isn't as friendly sounding as CARES, was a $1.9 trillion package. In it, $362 billion was set aside for state and local government relief. NACO and the League of Cities did a really good job, I feel like, this time of putting a better allocation methodology into this bill, which allowed direct payments to counties of all sizes, and didn't decrease your payment for the municipalities within your county boundaries. And so $65.1 billion was given in direct aid to counties. And then part of the rest of the package, the other 1.6 trillion-ish, was for other things, including vaccine distribution, testing, public health support, increased temporary assistance for needy families, behavioral and mental health, housing utility assistance, food and nutrition assistance. This is the same act that extended the $300 a week federal unemployment to September of this year. It included education stabilization, payroll protection funds, economic injury and disaster loans, public transit bill funding, and FEMA and EPA funding. So the American Rescue Plan did a whole lot of things. So if we hear things that this is ARPA, there's a whole lot to ARPA that isn't the county funding. But when we refer to ARPA internally to the county, we're talking about this, the $139.9 million that we're receiving directly that can be used to respond to COVID. So that $65.1 billion was allocated to every county based on the share of the national population. Our portion came to a total of $139.9 million. We'll receive payment in 2 equal tranches. One we received a couple weeks ago, and the second we'll receive 12 months later. So the initial payment was $69.96 million. These funds are required to be spent by December 31st of 2024, but according to the guidance issued, the Treasury is interpreting this to mean as long as those funds are obligated to a major project by the end of 2024, we can finish those projects and actually get the cash out the door to vendors by December 31st, 2026. And that's crucial because some of the things that we're going to be looking at that you'll see in the next few pages are going to be some major infrastructure projects, specifically in stormwater, things like that are allowable under the grant. And as we all know, those are very long-term projects, take a lot of time to design and build. And so even though end of 2024 sounds like a long way away, when you're talking about stormwater and water infrastructure, the fact that we can actually spend the money till December 31st, 2026 is helpful. Quarterly project and expenditure reports are going to be due to the U.S. Treasury, very similar to what we were dealing with CARES that we've been doing all along. A new requirement, though, is a recovery plan and performance report. It has to be filed annually. The first one of those has to be filed for the activity through June 30th of this year. We have to file it in August, and essentially it becomes very transparent to the citizens what we're doing with the money. It basically will include descriptions of the projects we funded, information about how the performance indicators and objectives of each award that we've given out and every project we're doing, and helping local residents understand how their government is substantially using these resources provided by this fund. And so that's a new requirement for any county or municipality or state over 200,000 residents, which we are. So we will be working with the Treasury on that. So the eligible uses of this fund, there was some information to begin with that we understood that this was going to be a lot more flexible than CARES. And then when it came out, there's a few additional uses, but certain things got more restrictive. And so the funds must be used to respond or mitigate to the public health emergency of COVID-19 and address its negative economic impacts. The place where it became less restricted is you can continue regular government services, but only to the extent of revenue loss. And there's a formula in the act itself, and then the Treasury gave an interpretation of it, and this will not apply to El Paso County. And so we will not be able to use this to continue regular government services that don't otherwise fit within the confines of the grant. One thing, it cannot be used to intentionally reduce revenue through a sales tax holiday or property tax cut. So we can't, we'd actually look at to see, could we somehow refund this to the citizens through some sort of tax decrease, because essentially it's the taxes that our citizens paid to the federal government. And really, this is a huge amount of federal money, and seeing if we could get it back, but we cannot reduce revenue to, and backfill this through like a property tax cut or something like that. We did look at that. Allowable uses also include infrastructure for water, sewer, or broadband. And then the last item that was allowable is premium pay for essential workers who couldn't telework during the pandemic.
We have a question from Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did want to highlight for the public's knowledge, one of the things, even though it's one of the headlines that the news made and says broadband, wasn't there a restriction that one of the things we thought we could do was get the nodes out for the broadband out to the community, but the federal government says, no, you can't do that. You can only do the end. But if you don't have the middle, you can't complete the end. And so this is one of the, I'd say, big shortfalls in this requirement from the federal government or guidance. And so I just want to put that out there publicly. If we're not able to do the kind of things we wanted to do on broadband, it's because it's going to be restricted from the federal government.
Yeah, to answer your question, our understanding at this point, and as you're aware with CARES, things change pretty fluidly. We'll see how this act happens. They're a little more upfront with their guidance this time. But their guidance requires us to focus on the last, they call it the last mile connectivity. So I'm sure we could build it out, if we had to get it from Colorado Springs out to eastern El Paso County, we could use it, but we'd also at the same time have to look at that last mile, and there's not enough funding to do that entire project. So we can't just do the nodes and then try to have other people come in and connect to those. So the proposed budget for the initial $69.96 million, the largest portion is for economic and workforce development, and then public safety, specifically responding to COVID and COVID variant, public health, stormwater infrastructure, water infrastructure, individual and family assistance, and grant administration. Are the slices of the pie. You'll also see that we've left $10 million unallocated, because in smart planning, we know that this is a fluid situation and things come up all the time. We have no idea what this fall looks like, what next year looks like, and because this is a 3.5-year grant, we want to make sure that we are not allocating 100% of it right up to the front in case our estimates are off or in case new ideas are come forward. We have community leaders talking to us constantly and looking for ways to make sure that we are using this money the most appropriately. So we are open to that. So economic and workforce development. So this $20 million would include our regional business relief grants, doing another round of those. Our Economic Development Office is working closely with partners to identify the best way to go about this. We hope to have a grant portal open here in the next couple of weeks. And if I'm misspeaking, Crystal Latier is here if you have any questions for her. But wanting to make sure we do the right thing with the money and getting it to the correct businesses. This also includes some other business support, depending on the needs from other businesses. It includes Pikes Peak Workforce Center's pop-up location, upskilling training for regional business relief grant recipients, retraining for COVID-impacted workers. This is kind of a cool thing. There's certain industries that we have that have been severely impacted by the pandemic who can no longer get employees, things that have huge training barriers that we're going to be able to go out and help workers get trained and then be able to be employed and get our economy back to pre-pandemic unemployment numbers. That's our goal. Tourism support. One of our industries that has been the most impacted is tourism. And so we have identified specific money to be able to go and work with certain institutions in town to be able to promote the Pikes Peak region. We want to work with Visit Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak Attraction Association, the Olympic Museum, places like that to be able to promote tourism, get Colorado back open, specifically the Pikes Peak region back open and bringing in tourism. We also are including the Small Business Development Center, as well as supporting our regional chambers. We know that our chambers do amazing things for our business community, and they've had, when businesses weren't having very much revenue, one of the first things that they cut was paying their chamber dues and saying, okay, we're gonna leave the chamber maybe for a year, we'll come back when we have more revenue, but we need to make sure that those chambers stay in business and are operational. So we wanna work with our regional chambers. We're hoping our cities will work with their chambers in their cities to continue the hard work for the chambers. Public safety, COVID and COVID variant response. Although COVID seems to be lowering right now, we still know that COVID is a thing we have to continue to respond to, specifically in our jail. The costs for taking care of an inmate right now are significantly higher than they were pre-pandemic. The things that we have to do to intake an inmate, to separate them, to test them as they come in and test all along. So there's 17 million of the initial $69 million identified for public safety and responding to COVID. In CARES, there was a broad exception for public safety that you were allowed to, regardless of the public safety function, bill the grant to public safety. In ARPA, that public safety has to specifically be related to COVID. So we're a little more limited, but still have significant expenditures that we have identified that would be eligible for this. Public health. This is going to help fill the gaps of other public health funding being received for COVID reasons. There's significant federal funding flowing through public health, and I forgot to mention this, like Pikes Peak Workforce Center as well. There's significant additional funding. So this isn't the only funding they're getting, but this is going to help fill some gaps where there's other targeted funding coming in. Public health is receiving funding for vaccination, testing, COVID response. This is going to help us address some inequities, as well as other items that are identified by the Public Health Director and the Public Health Board. We have allocated a total of $13 million to water and stormwater infrastructure. The stormwater projects, if you saw in the pie chart, that was $5 million. Those are projects that are going to be identified by El Paso County's Department of Public Works. They're working hard to see what the best impact of that money would be, and we'll let the Board of County Commissioners know when those projects have been identified. And on the water side, we have allocated $8 million to work with our regional water districts to identify and improve our water infrastructure. This is a great opportunity to improve our regional water infrastructure, and we're working closely with each water district to see what the best use of this funding would be. And, excuse me, $1 million we've set aside. This is a very large grant, and we are trying to make sure we administer it for as little money as we possibly can, but there are very real costs to administering this grant. The CARES grant, a lot of that requirement was waived. There are still a lot of reporting requirements and things like that. The reporting requirements for ARPA are significantly higher, as well as all of the federal the strings that come with federal funding are attached to the ARPA grant. So significant subrecipient monitoring oversight. So when we grant money to, say, a water district, we're going to have to do a lot of oversight. So we're going to need some employees to do that. So we've set aside $1 million of the initial $70 million to administer the grant. And the last item, individual and family assistance. These are just a few programs that we have identified that aren't receiving other dedicated federal funding. As I mentioned before, other departments are receiving increased funding, so is the Department of Human Services. This is a couple things that we're not aware of additional direct funding coming for, such as a family support center. And then the emergency rental assistance, that was actually a direct grant. There's what they're calling ERA 1, and then there was ERA 2. ERA 2 is part of the ARPA grant. And those are direct rental assistance dollars. We have worked closely with the State Division of Housing to administer the funds on our behalf. But with that, we wanted to make sure we use some of our ARPA funding to make sure that our residents know that that funding is there and available for them to help, as well as provide wraparound services for them, some case management, make sure that people stay housed, make sure that we're avoiding evictions that are financially based, but also get them the services that are necessary to make sure that the problem doesn't continue and we catch them up on their rent, but then that we don't provide the services to help them stay housed. Utilizing some funding there. So that is everything that we have identified for the first $70 million. I think we're going to be able to do some amazing things with this, and so very excited for this funding and the ability to administer it. But I'd be open to any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Bremer.
Thank you. Nikki, are you able to go back to that original pie chart? Thank you. So the grant administration 1%, can you tell me, you very well explained all the reasons that is necessary. What I'd like to know is, let's say that for the economic and workforce development, we open another grant program there for individual and family assistance. There's another grant program application process that we open there. So is that 1% grant administration that we see there, does that include administration of other programming that we would do to disperse this, or are those in their own individual buckets?
Those are in their own individual buckets.
Okay.
And so economic and workforce development would include the staffing to run all the economic development portions of it. Same thing with public health. So the grant administration is just the purely administrative side of working with the U.S. Treasury, overseeing everything. The legal side of it, there's legal costs involved. Things like that are in the administration portion.
Okay, thank you. And then in our experience, let's take, for example, the CARES Act funding, the administration of the small business assistance loans and loan and application programs we had there. Are we able to keep it in any one category at about the 1% or below?
We are. We were able to keep the money very tight and not bill indirect costs to this grant to make sure that we're utilizing 99% of the money to get directly out to the functions that we're trying to get it out
Perfect.
to.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yes, Commissioner Williams.
This is actually not a question, it's a comment. First of all, I really appreciate that as El Paso County, we work really hard to abide by our conservative principles. So we're going to stick to the letter of the law. We, of course, during CARES, it changed every other week. It might change, and if it does change, we've got $10 million to help us out when it changes. But also, too, in that grant administration, we may have to have professionals who can handle things as technical as the Davis-Bacon Act, because at the end of the day, we always watch that bottom line, and we make sure that when our federal audit comes down, which we are required to do every year anyway, that we're still always awesome, whatever the rating for an audit is. And to me, that's one of the most important things about being an El Paso County Commissioner is, yes, this is a lot of taxpayer dollars, and yes, the first question probably all of us asked was, how can we get it right back into their pockets? And the federal government says, no, you can't do a sales tax holiday, you can't do a property tax rebate. So, you know, this is a lot of money coming out of the federal government that someday our kids will have to pay for. But we want to ensure the public that we make sure that this money is spent correctly. We make sure we account for every penny in the correct fashion. And at the end of the day, it's audited, and we've always passed that audit, to my knowledge, in the years I've worked here. So we just want to let the public know that we are very conservative and very careful in the administration of this money. Thank you.
Great. Other comments or questions? Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank you, Nikki, for the update. I want to also reassure our residents in El Paso County that you know, our desire, our goal is here to ensure that we will and that we are going to effectively and efficiently administer these ARPA funds for our community, as we've done, as was already mentioned, making sure that we are doing right by our community. And in doing that also, making sure we do take care of our community. And particularly, I'd like to highlight the the economic and workforce development, the regional business relief grants, which I thought we did an effective job on when we had the CARES Act dollars, and we did this exact same thing last year, that we ensure our economic development team work to quickly and effectively get those applications available in the coming days or weeks for those businesses that have been struggling and perhaps on the verge of failing, so that we can take care of our community, make sure they can get back to work, our residents who have been struggling, and that we do so in an effective way for getting this started for our unincorporated businesses, county businesses. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, and just I know that at least I've heard that we probably are still going to get federal implementing instructions. We've got the first tranche of it, but I think there is more coming. So I think it is important and appropriate to leave some unallocated funds, because we don't know what aperture might broaden up or what aperture might close down with the follow-on implementing instructions. So we do need to retain that flexibility a little bit, at least for now. And then on the economic and workforce development, if you could maybe answer a quick question for me. I think that's the bucket that's going to include trying to help business startups, because we have lost some businesses in El Paso County because of COVID. So business startups would be taking smaller businesses and growing them to bigger business, or maybe some type of venues to help citizens create businesses and basically replace the businesses that we lost. And the loss of those businesses is terrible, and some of them may not be recoverable at all. But if we can just get more businesses back into the community, I think that would be good. I assume somehow, some way, that bucket of money will be addressing that issue along with all the other issues in economic development and workforce development.
Correct. In that economic and workforce development, there was about $2.5 million set aside to address the business startups or whatever the business needs are to be able to grow those businesses, in addition to $10 million for economic or the regional business relief grants is in that slice of the pie.
Thank you. And then, obviously, I think at least one of my goals, I'm going to bet that the rest of the commissioners feel similarly, is we've got to get the economy back. We've got to get the workforce back. Those are our big challenges. We've got to get us back to pre-COVID numbers. And I think just looking at the general pie chart here, I think this goes a long way towards us achieving that. Those, for me, are really important. We still have to continue to pay attention to public health and so forth, so we've got budget in there. And I know in some of these areas, there are other buckets of money coming down from the federal government that are independent of us. So while we see some numbers on this chart, and we might wonder why one line is a little smaller than another, we took into account some other lines of funding that's coming from the federal or state government, where they will receive those funds plus these funds. So I think that's really important. And I appreciate the comments from some of the other commissioners as well with regard to the federal allocation of these monies. You know, when we have a national emergency, it is useful for the federal government, state government, or whomever to provide financial assistance to help communities get through the challenge. But when this is over, I really hope the federal government will take a serious look at putting its financial house in order and really thinking about how to spend less money and try to get closer to a balanced budget. Otherwise, we could have other repercussions down the road that would be very, very difficult for everybody, including local governments, to deal with. So I am hopeful the federal government will pay a lot of attention to that and really tighten its belt after this crisis is over with regard to spending, because if they don't, we will have other issues that'll be a big problem. So let's hope that they do that. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner.
I do have one more comment. Thank you. I think that this is a very fair and well thought through plan for how we would, again, ultimate goal of having our citizens benefit from federal money coming into our community. One thing that I kind of want to point out, you spoke about, you know, the issues and the restrictions on the broadband, for example, that this board has been incredibly effective as a board and through memberships of CCI and NACO and other things at really advocating for what actually works on the ground in a community. And I would encourage us to stay involved and very connected with our counterparts in DC who are advising the Treasury of the guidance that's coming back to us. I would love to see that broadband restriction particularly lifted. And if you think about it, I mean, that means we could, you know, the education system is receiving a lot of other federal funding right now too. I believe that some of the telecommunications companies are as well. But by lifting the restrictions on us as local government, we could better partner with them to ensure that start to finish, each kid that unfortunately has to be online sometimes for school can actually get the broadband service they need to do that. And that our El Paso County employees that may from time to time need to work remotely also have that same ability. This is pretty core to what we need to do to really make this work. And I would just encourage us to continue to talk to our partners at NACO, our federal lobbyists, and others to really advocate for less restriction on some components that would better allow us to tap into and, as you say, fill the gaps and really better utilize different sources of funding that are intended to ultimately benefit our citizens. So let's see what we can do to break down some barriers that actually let us do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Excellent comment. And really the comment is proffered for several reasons. One is the more people that can work from home, the less risk we have with virus spread. Now, maybe that becomes lesser of an issue, you know, as we march through the year, but it still will be true continuing going forward. The other one is the more rural broadband that we can get into El Paso County, or really nationally, the less strain we'll have on our national infrastructure, roads and bridges and highways. Because people will be able to work from home and commute less. And we had a discovery in El Paso County going through COVID where we had a lot of people stay home and found out that we didn't really lose any productivity as a result of many people working from home. I would imagine many other public agencies and companies made similar discoveries as they moved a lot of people to work from home. So I think that actually increases the need and interest and requirement for rural broadband or some kind of broadband for, all citizens. So great comment. I appreciate it. And that is maybe something we can work on with NACO and CCI about trying to remove some of those restrictions and get us to do something in that arena that would be helpful for El Paso County. I see one other comment from Commissioner Geithner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And wonderful comments from all of my colleagues here. But I did want to make a comment as well on the broadband. It is the one piece of that water and sewer, the third component of that infrastructure piece that's not specifically allocated for here. So I do think it's important to continue those conversations as guidance does change. Being a resident of the unincorporated and not too far from many of those residents that do not have broadband, I really appreciate the attention and the comments that it really is kind of the alternative to our roads and our highways, right, that we are using for all those other purposes. And so it's become, I think, very important as a utility function for our citizens. I also wanted to just say thank you to my colleagues and all of our staff members for all the conversations that have been ongoing. Water obviously is also very important to the unincorporated areas. I think I've said in our last couple of meetings that there have been lots of water meetings with regional providers, and that continues to be incredibly important there. And I think that it's important to also note that both of those things, both water and broadband in our unincorporated areas, are related to economic development. We cannot have development or growth in those areas for our businesses when they are held back by those items. And so while it's not directly in that pie piece there, it is certainly a very critical piece. And also, I think, one of the most effective ways of getting those tax dollars back as close to our citizens as possible. So thank you for all of the discussion on that, and looking forward to continuing to have those discussions about the specifics of this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Nikki, are there any additional updates?
No, the only thing I would say is one of the major reasons we left the unallocated 10 million is if we do receive updated guidance on the broadband, because right now it just says that you have to make sure that you're incorporating the last mile in your plans. And so if we can get something that we could partner with someone else to do something like that, then we have money available to be able to approach that.
Okay, great. And then I guess for the matter of public record, assuming we vote successfully for the resolution here to recognize this revenue and appropriate major blocks, then the procedures going forward will be to develop each of these individual slices of the pie in more detail, and in the near term be able to get us to an allocation process that will be in public domain with regard to helping companies and these kinds of processes. That'll be the next step, assuming this concludes successfully here.
Absolutely. We're just like with CARES, we're committed to absolute transparency. We've already created tabs on our website to show, this presentation will be there. We'll put transparency reports up there, their federal reporting, and making sure that everybody can know exactly how we spend every dime of this money, as well as obviously our normal procurement processes where we make sure we're competitively bidding everything. And then we are planning to do a lot of outreach to make sure that anyone who is eligible for the Regional Business Relief Grants will know about them, do the best of our ability to get the word out to our businesses and our citizens.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right, hearing none, we are on item 13, and we do have a resolution. I'll entertain a motion.
I would move the resolution to recognize revenue and appropriate expenditures in the amount of $69,964,919 to the Restricted General Fund, American Rescue Plan Act Fund 2021, budget for the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021.
Second.
Great, there's a motion and a second. Any last comments or questions? And hearing none, let's proceed to a vote. Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Geithner.
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
Commissioner Bremer.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
That
Commissioners.
resolution passes.